Hidden beneath layers of heavy fabric, no one ever looked twice at the quiet accountant in the corner. They certainly never expected the ruthless head of the city's most dangerous syndicate to corner her in a shattered warehouse, strip away her armor, and whisper a terrifying, intoxicating promise: "You're perfect." Clara Higgins did not exist to be seen. At 27, she had mastered the art of urban camouflage. Standing at 5'5" and wearing a solid size 22, she had learned early on that society only had two reactions to a fat woman, cruel mockery, or complete invisibility. Clara much preferred the latter. Her daily armor was an olive-green men's XXL Carhartt chore coat she had bought at a thrift store in Queens. It was stiff, shapeless, and swallowed her entirely. Underneath, she wore loose black trousers and oversized sweaters, effectively erasing her waist, her hips, and her heavy chest. She was a ghost, and a ghost was exactly what Moretti Imports needed in their back office. Located off a gritty stretch of the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway in Red Hook, the import-export business was ostensibly a distributor of high-end Italian olive oils, cured meats, and truffles. In reality, it was the logistical hub for the Moretti family's sprawling underworld empire. Clara wasn't stupid. She knew the crates labeled San Marzano didn't actually weigh 200 pounds, and she knew the men who occasionally walked through the warehouse in sharp Armani suits weren't there to sample prosciutto. But the pay was double what she'd make at a legitimate accounting firm, and more importantly, the warehouse manager, a gruff man named Paulie, never looked at her with pity or disgust. He barely looked at her at all. It was late on a rainy Tuesday in November. The warehouse was silent, except for the rhythmic drumming of rain against the corrugated steel roof and the hum of a space heater near Clara's desk. She was hunched over her glowing monitor, cross-referencing a stack of bill of lading documents from the port of Newark against a convoluted Excel spreadsheet. Something was wrong. 3 shipping containers were marked as cleared by customs, but the financial ledger showed a deficit of nearly $400,000. A discrepancy this large wasn't an accounting error, it was theft. Someone inside the operation was skimming. Clara felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Her instinct was to close the laptop, put on her massive coat, and walk to the F train without looking back. But if an audit caught this, her signature was on the intake forms. They would blame her. "You're here late." Clara jumped her elbow, knocking a mug of lukewarm coffee onto the linoleum floor. She spun around in her rolling chair. Standing in the doorway of her cramped, fluorescent-lit office was Leo Moretti. He was the ghost story the men in the warehouse whispered about, the youngest son who had violently taken control of the family after his father's passing. Leo was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded an aura of casual, terrifying authority. He wasn't wearing a suit today, but rather a dark cashmere turtleneck and a tailored charcoal overcoat that fit him flawlessly. His dark eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto her. I had some ledgers to finish, Mr. Moretti." Clara stammered immediately, crossing her arms over her chest, trying to shrink backward into her oversized Carhartt coat that was draped over the back of her chair. She realized she was only wearing a thin, somewhat fitted long-sleeve shirt. Feeling exposed, she grabbed the massive coat and hastily pulled it on, zipping it up to her chin. Leo watched the frantic movement, his brow furrowing slightly, but he didn't comment on it. He stepped into the small office. The room suddenly felt entirely devoid of oxygen. He smelled of rain, expensive cedarwood cologne, and something distinctly metallic. Paulie said we had a new bookkeeper. Said she was quiet. Didn't say she worked until midnight. Leo said his voice, a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in Clara's chest. He stepped closer, looking down at her monitors. "What are you looking at, Clara?" She swallowed hard. The fact that he knew her name terrified her. "Just Standard inventory reconciliation. Leo leaned over her desk. His proximity made her heart hammer wildly against her ribs. He tapped a long, calloused finger against the screen right on the highlighted deficit. 400 grand is a hell of a rounding error. I didn't take it, Clara blurted out, her voice trembling. I found it 20 minutes ago. I was trying to trace the routing numbers to see where the leak was so I could report it. The diversion happened at the Newark docks before the shipment reached us. Someone authorized a secondary truck. Leo straightened up, looking at her with a new, intense appraisal. Most men in his organization would have lied, panicked, or tried to cover it up to save their own skins. This girl, trembling inside a coat 3 times her size, had tracked a highly sophisticated embezzlement scheme in an hour. Who authorized the truck? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. It was logged under Paulie's access code, she whispered. Leo's jaw tightened. Print the logs, then go home. Clara frantically hit the print shortcut. As the pages fed out of the machine, Leo stood by the door watching her. He didn't look at her the way men usually did either, looking right past her or looking at her with thinly veiled distaste. He was studying her. He was studying the way she clutched the lapels of her oversized coat like a shield. You wear that massive thing like you're trying to disappear, Leo murmured, taking the papers from her trembling hand. I get cold easily. Clara lied, looking at the floor. Right, Leo said softly. Drive safe, Clara. Over the next 3 weeks, the atmosphere at Moretti Imports changed drastically. Paulie never showed up to work again. Instead, a new, sharply dressed man named Silvio took over management. But the real shift was Leo. The head of the Moretti family began visiting the Red Hook warehouse almost daily. Clara tried to maintain her routine of invisibility. She wore her baggy sweaters, her shapeless trousers, and kept her colossal Carhartt coat on indoors, citing the drafty warehouse. But Leo made it impossible to disappear. He would casually stroll into her office, bring her black coffee from Devotion, a fancy cafe miles away in Williamsburg, and ask her questions about the accounts. He sat on the edge of her desk, invading her space, forcing her to look up into his dark, penetrating eyes. She didn't understand it. Men like Leo Moretti dated supermodels, actresses, and mob heiresses who wore size 0 designer dresses. Clara was a fat girl from Queens with a degree in accounting and a history of being told she took up too much space. Her last boyfriend, a local bartender named Greg, used to grab her stomach and make helpful comments about cutting carbs until she broke down crying. She had spent the last 3 years hiding her body, convinced it was a source of shame. Yet Leo's gaze felt heavy, lingering, and completely devoid of mockery. The tension broke on a freezing Thursday night in early December. Clara was alone in the office, waiting for a massive data transfer to finish so she could leave for the weekend. The warehouse was supposedly empty, locked down from the outside. She had just taken off her heavy coat, draping it over her chair. She was wearing a soft, form-fitting maroon turtleneck, a rare garment she only wore when she knew no one would see her, and a pair of dark denim jeans that hugged the wide flare of her hips and the thick curve of her thighs. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the main warehouse floor, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Clara froze. She crept to her office door and peered out through the small frosted window. 2 men in dark tactical gear were moving through the aisles of pallets holding heavy crowbars. One of them smashed the security camera on the eastern wall. The O'Malley crew from Hell's Kitchen. Rumors of a turf war had been circulating the office water cooler for days. They weren't here to steal. They were here to destroy the hub and send a message. Panic seized her. Clara backed away, frantically grabbing her phone to call 911, but realized she couldn't. This was a Mafia front. calling the cops would sign her own death warrant with the Morettis. Before she could think, the handle to her office door violently twisted. The glass shattered inward as a crowbar smashed through it. Clara screamed, dropping her phone. A large man with a scarred face kicked the door open, grinning maliciously as he spotted her. "Well, well, look what we have here. Didn't think anyone was working late." "Please," Clara begged, backing up until she hit her desk. "I'm just a bookkeeper. I don't know anything." "Don't matter." The thug laughed, stepping toward her. "You're a casualty of war, sweetheart." He lunged for her. Clara acted purely on adrenaline. She grabbed her massive heavy Carhartt coat from the chair and threw it directly into the man's face. The thick canvas blinded him for a second. Clara shoved past him, sprinting out of the office and into the cavernous, dimly lit warehouse. "Get back here, you fat bitch!" the man roared, untangling himself from the coat and giving chase. Clara ran as fast as her legs could carry her, her breath burning in her lungs. She ducked between two towering stacks of wooden pallets, trying to navigate the labyrinth. Her heart pounded furiously. Without her coat, she felt entirely exposed, the cool air of the warehouse biting through her thin sweater. She rounded a corner near the loading docks and suddenly collided with a solid wall of muscle. She screamed, flailing backward, but strong hands gripped her arms, steadying her. "Clara, stop, it's me." She looked up. It was Leo. He was wearing a dark suit, but his jacket was unbuttoned, and he held a suppressed Sig Sauer pistol in his right hand. His eyes were wide, with a frantic, terrifying intensity she had never seen before. Behind him stood two of his own men, weapons drawn. "Leo!" She sobbed completely, forgetting to use his formal title. "They're here." They broke into the office. "I know," Leo said smoothly, pushing her behind his broad frame. "Stay behind me." The thug from her office rounded the corner, crowbar raised but stopped dead in his tracks when he saw Leo Moretti aiming a gun squarely at his chest. "Drop it!" Leo commanded, his voice devoid of all warmth. It was the voice of an executioner. The thug dropped the crowbar. The metal clattered loudly against the concrete. "Moretti, it's just a message from O'Malley." Leo didn't let him finish. He fired twice. The silenced gun made a sharp thwip-thwip sound, and the man collapsed to the floor, motionless. Clara clamped her hands over her mouth, stifling a scream. She squeezed her eyes shut, trembling violently. The reality of who Leo was, what this world was, crashed over her all at once. "Clear the rest of the building," Leo ordered his men. They nodded and vanished into the shadows. Leo turned around to face Clara. He immediately holstered his weapon, his cold, lethal demeanor instantly melting into deep concern as he looked at her shaking form. "Clara, are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "No," she gasped out, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. "No, I threw my coat at him and ran." It was only then, in the dim emergency lighting of the loading dock, that Leo truly looked at her. Without her massive, shapeless coat, Clara was entirely visible. The maroon turtleneck clung tightly to her body, highlighting the heavy, soft curve of her stomach, the lush fullness of her breasts, and the wide, thick flare of her hips in her jeans. She realized how he was looking at her. Panic and deep-seated shame flooded her system. Humiliated, Clara immediately crossed her arms over her stomach, hunching her shoulders forward in a desperate attempt to hide her body, to shrink back into the ghost she was supposed to be. "Don't," she whispered, turning her face away, her cheeks burning with hot tears. "Please don't look at me. I know it's gross. My coat is back there." Leo stepped closer, closing the distance between them. He didn't say a word. He reached out his large, warm hands, gently but firmly gripping her wrists. "Let go," Clara pleaded, trying to pull her arms away to cover her stomach again. "Please, Leo. I'm hideous. Just let me get my coat." "Stop hiding," Leo commanded softly. He slowly pulled her arms apart, forcing her to stand straight, forcing her to be completely exposed to his gaze. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the disgust, waiting for the cruel comment that always came. Instead, she felt Leo's hand gently cup her jaw, his thumb brushing away a tear from her cheek. He stepped into her space, his chest brushing against hers. He looked down at her full, soft figure with a hunger and a reverence that made Clara's breath hitch in her throat. His gaze traced the curve of her waist, the flare of her hips, before meeting her terrified, tear-filled eyes. "You spend so much time drowning yourself in that damn coat," Leo whispered, his voice thick with raw, possessive emotion. He pulled her flush against his solid body, his hand settling firmly on the wide curve of her hips. "You're perfect." Sunlight sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows, hot and blinding, pulling Clara from a deep, exhausted sleep. She blinked her vision, adjusting to a sprawling bedroom that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The walls were painted a muted charcoal, the bed massive, and draped in dark grey silk. Outside the glass, the unmistakable skyline of Lower Manhattan loomed. She wasn't in her cramped Astoria apartment. She was in a penthouse on Greenwich Street, deep in the heart of Tribeca. Memory hit her like a physical blow. The warehouse, the shattered glass, the gunshot. Leo Moretti's hands holding her, his voice a low tremor as he called her perfect. Panic spiked in her chest. She sat up abruptly, realizing she was wearing an unfamiliar, incredibly soft silk chemise that clung to every curve of her heavy breasts and the thick roll of her stomach. Her armor, her massive Carhartt coat, her baggy jeans, her oversized sweaters was entirely gone. "Looking for this?" Clara gasped and pulled the silk sheets up to her chin. Leo was leaning against the heavy oak door frame of the ensuite bathroom. He was dressed in dark trousers and a crisp white button-down, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and faintly dusted with dark hair. In one hand, he held a steaming mug of espresso. In the other, draped casually over his arm, was her olive-green chore coat. "You brought me to your home," Clara whispered, her voice rough with sleep and fear. "The O'Malleys know who you are now," Leo said, stepping into the room. His voice was clinical, businesslike, but his eyes were dark and heavy as they locked onto her. "Liam O'Malley runs the Hell's Kitchen docks. He's aggressive and he's losing money. You flagged the $400,000 they siphoned from my shipments. That makes you a liability to them. You can't go back to Queens, Clara. It's not safe. I have a life," she protested weakly, though even to her own ears the claim sounded hollow. Her life consisted of spreadsheets, takeout from Golden Dragon, and avoiding mirrors. "Your life is here now," Leo corrected smoothly. He tossed the ugly heavy coat onto a leather armchair in the corner. "And you won't be needing that anymore." Clara felt a flush of hot shame creep up her neck. "Leo, please. You don't understand. I need my clothes. I can't walk around like this. People look at me. They stare. I'm not like the women you associate with." Leo set his espresso down on the nightstand. He moved with the predatory grace of a large cat sitting on the edge of the mattress. His weight dipped the bed, pulling Clara closer to him. He reached out his large hands, gripping her wrists gently, prying her fingers away from the sheet she was using as a shield. "I know exactly how people look at you, Clara," he murmured, his voice dropping an octave. "They look at you with stupid, blind eyes. They see a ghost because you force them to. You hide." He slowly pulled the sheet down to her waist. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, turning her face away, bracing for the disgust. Her ex-boyfriend Greg used to pinch the flesh of her waist and sigh. She expected Leo to do the same. Instead, she felt the warm, calloused palm of his hand flatten against her bare stomach. A violent shiver racked her body. Leo's touch wasn't critical. It was reverent. His hand traced the deep curve of her waist, sliding up to cup the heavy weight of her breast through the thin silk. "Look at me," Leo commanded, a raw edge to his voice. Clara slowly opened her eyes. Leo was staring at her body with a naked, consuming hunger. There was no pity. There was no mocking. There was only absolute, terrifying possession. "You are lush. You are soft. You are entirely exquisitely beautiful," he whispered fiercely, his thumb brushing over her collarbone. "I spent the last 3 weeks watching you drown yourself in cheap canvas, wanting nothing more than to tear it off and see what you were hiding. I will never let you hide from me again." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. For 27 years, her size had been her greatest shame. In Leo Moretti's eyes, it was her greatest asset. "Now," Leo said, his tone shifting back to dangerous authority as he stood up. "There are boxes in the closet. Clothes. My people brought them in from a boutique on Madison Avenue, Marina Rinaldi, I believe. Get dressed. We have a rat to catch, and I need the smartest accountant in New York to find him." The next 48 hours were a blur of financial forensics and intense, suffocating luxury. Clara did not leave the penthouse. She sat at a massive mahogany dining table, surrounded by encrypted laptops, bank statements, and shipping manifests. She wore a dark burgundy cashmere wrap dress from the boxes Leo had provided. It was a size 22 tailored flawlessly, hugging the wide swell of her hips and cinching deeply at her waist. For the first time in her adult life, she felt a strange, terrifying spark of power in her own skin. Whenever Leo walked through the room barking orders into his phone to his enforcers in Brooklyn or negotiating with suppliers in Naples, his eyes would invariably track back to her, lingering on her curves with a heat that made her heart race. Clara focused on the numbers. The numbers never lied. She traced the missing $400,000 through a labyrinth of shell companies. The O'Malleys were supposed to be the beneficiaries, which is why everyone assumed Liam O'Malley ordered the raid on the Red Hook warehouse. But as Clara ran the swift routing codes through a backdoor program she had written in college, a different picture emerged. "Leo," she called out on Friday evening. He appeared instantly, walking over and leaning heavily on the back of her chair. He rested his chin near her temple, his presence an immovable anchor. "What did you find, Mia Cara?" "The money didn't go to Hell's Kitchen," Clara said, pointing a trembling finger at the glowing screen. "The O'Malleys are a smoke screen. The funds were routed through a dummy corporation in Delaware, then bounced to an offshore account at Cayman National Bank." Leo's jaw tightened. "Who owns the Cayman account?" Clara swallowed hard. "I hacked the registry metadata. The signatory is a holding group called Vento LLC. Leo. Vento is registered to Silvio's wife." Silence fell over the penthouse, heavy and suffocating. Silvio. The new manager. The man Leo had personally promoted to replace Paulie. Silvio had stolen the money tipped off the O'Malleys to create a gang war diversion and left Clara in the warehouse to be killed to cover his tracks. Leo slowly stood up straight. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. When Clara looked up at him, the tender, obsessive lover was gone. In his place stood the ruthless head of the Moretti syndicate. "Call him," Leo said softly to one of his guards, stationed by the door. "Tell Silvio I need him at the penthouse immediately to discuss the retaliation against Liam O'Malley." Silvio arrived an hour later, looking sharp in a tailored navy suit, projecting the perfect image of a loyal lieutenant. He stepped out of the private elevator and into the cavernous living room of the penthouse. "Boss." Silvio greeted his expression perfectly arranged into a mask of grim determination. "We got the boys ready in Brooklyn. Give the word and we wipe the O'Malleys off the map for what they did to our warehouse." "Is that right, Silvio?" Leo asked. He was pouring a glass of amber bourbon at the wet bar, not looking at the man. "Absolutely. We can't let them disrespect the family." "I agree," Leo said, turning around. He took a slow sip of his drink. "Disrespect must be punished. Treason even more so." Silvio frowned slightly. "Treason." "Clara," Leo called out. From the shadows of the adjoining library, Clara stepped into the light. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She didn't cross her arms over her stomach. Wearing the burgundy dress that painted every heavy, beautiful curve of her body, she walked to the center of the room, holding a leather-bound folder. Silvio's eyes widened in genuine shock. "The bookkeeper, I thought she ran off after the hit." "She didn't run," Leo said smoothly, walking over to stand directly behind Clara. He placed a possessive, heavy hand on her waist, anchoring her to him in front of his lieutenant. "She's been working." Clara opened the folder. Her hands shook slightly, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "You authorized the secondary truck, Silvio. You used Paulie's old access codes to bypass the Newark Port Authority. You routed $400,000 into Vento LLC, an account registered to your wife in the Cayman Islands. And then you called Liam O'Malley and told him the warehouse was unguarded, hoping they would burn the ledgers and me to ashes." Silvio's face drained of color. He looked from the documents in Clara's hand to the dead, cold eyes of Leo Moretti. "Boss, it's a lie," Silvio stammered, taking a step backward. "She's framing me. You're going to believe some fat nobody accountant over a made man who bled for your father." The insult hung in the air for exactly 1 second. Leo moved faster than Clara's eyes could track. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, his hand shooting out to grip Silvio by the throat. He slammed the lieutenant against the reinforced glass of the penthouse window with bone-shattering force. Silvio choked his hands, clawing uselessly at Leo's iron grip. "You will never speak to her that way." Leo snarled his voice, a demonic rasp. "She is the woman who saved my empire while you tried to sell it for scraps. She is a queen. You are a rat." Leo didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. He simply tightened his grip until Silvio's eyes rolled back and he collapsed to the floor, unconscious and gasping for air. Leo snapped his fingers, and 2 guards dragged Silvio out by his ankles. His fate was sealed. The penthouse was deadly quiet again. Clara stood frozen, the folder slipping from her hands to hit the floor. The sheer violence of Leo's world was terrifying, but the fierce, absolute way he had defended her sent a dark, thrilling warmth straight to her core. Leo turned back to her, adjusting his cuffs, his breathing completely even. He walked slowly back to her, his dark eyes softening instantly as they took her in. "It's over," he murmured, cupping her face in his hands. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice trembling as she looked up into his handsome, ruthless face. Do I go back to hiding?" "Never." Leo vowed, leaning down to press his lips against hers in a bruising, claiming kiss. When he pulled back, his eyes burned with fierce devotion. "You are done hiding, Clara. You are going to take the corner office at corporate. You are going to wear dresses that show the entire world exactly what belongs to me. And you are going to stand by my side. Understood?" Clara looked at the man who had torn down her walls, stripped away her armor, and worshipped the very body she had spent her life despising. She felt the heavy, undeniable truth settle in her chest. She smiled a true, brilliant smile that transformed her face and wrapped her arms around his broad shoulders, pulling him down to her. Understood, boss. Do you want more gripping high-stakes drama and unforgettable romance? If Clara and Leo's story kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button right now. Share this video with a friend who loves fierce heroines and protective mafia bosses. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a single twist in our next thrilling real-life story. Drop a comment below. What would you do in Clara's shoes? See you next time.